The 8x58R is a first-generation smokeless powder cartridge created in Denmark. They adopted it alongside their Model 1889 Krag Jorgensen rifle. That's what I'll be using to shoot later on in this video. In the 1890s, Sweden also used a cartridge, converting their black powder rolling blocks to fire it as a stopgap before adopting a Mauser. Like many cartridges of the era, it started with a heavy round-nosed bullet weighing 237 grains, and was later updated to a 196 grain Spitzer bullet in 1908. This one original round I have is made by Norma. I only have one because it hasn't been made commercially in decades. If you want to shoot one of these rifles today, you have to make your own. That's what I'll be doing in this video. RCBS makes a die set. It's in Group G and is available on their website at time of recording. For bullets, I like to use standard .323 diameter bullets, same as used in 8mm Mauser. I stick to around 200 grains to mirror the original cartridge. That just leaves the brass. Unfortunately, it's not available off the shelf. However, it can be converted from two other cartridges. Any belted magnum. Here I have 7mm Remington Magnum and 4570. I'll see how they compare dimensionally. I'll measure the rim thickness, rim diameter, base diameter, shoulder diameter, and overall length. Now we'll look at how they differ from the 8x58R and what will need to be done in order to convert them, starting with the Magnum. It's long, so it will need to be trimmed down. The rim is undersized, both in thickness and diameter. The body is oversized. The sizing die would need to reduce it by quite a bit, as well as pushing the shoulder back. And of course the belt would have to be removed. Now on to the 4570. It's shorter, but due to the long neck on the 8x58, there should be enough of a neck to hold the bullet. The rim thickness is spot on, but it's oversized and would need to be turned down. The base diameter is good, but the sizing die would need to form the cartridge's taper, shoulder, and neck. The biggest drawback to the 4570, the short length, could be solved by starting with a longer cartridge, 4590 or longer, like this 45 basic 2 3/4 would work, but I want to show that it's possible with the much more common 4570. That's what I'll convert first. I'm using a lathe to turn down the rim on the 4570, though this can be done by turning the case in a drill and using a file. That's good enough. I can note where the dial on the hand wheel is set and trim the other cases to this same diameter. I'll just put a small chamfer on either side of the rim to break the sharp edge. Before I size, I'll anneal the cases with a propane torch. The sizing die needs to drastically change the shape of the case, Annealing will make the brass softer and easier to form. I'll spin the cases with the drill to ensure even heating. It only takes a few seconds, just until it starts to change color. To convert these cases to 8x58R, I'll use the proper dies, but use a shell holder for 4570. I'll screw the sizing die in the press. I'll set it up just like any other sizing die, with it touching the shell holder, and then another quarter turn. Once done properly, the press should cam over right at the end of the stroke. Converting this to another cartridge is much tougher than simply sizing a case, so good lubrication is needed. I'm using a case wax. I'll apply it using my fingers, making sure the whole body of the case has a thin layer. I'll start off easy to ensure that the case enters the die, and then slowly raise the ram. I'll only size a bit at a time, going slow and stopping often to check progress. Here you can see the shoulder starting to form. I'll put on another thin coat of wax. From here, I'll go slow and re-wax often as the shoulder needs to be pushed down quite a bit. Here's the fully formed case. There's no dents or lines in the shoulder and the neck. Now I'll test fit it in the rifle. Feeding just brass is tricky. I put the neck into the chamber and then push the back end over as if it was being stripped from the magazine. This ensures the rim moves under the extractor while feeding, but the bolt closes properly, just like it should. That's the 4570 case converted to 8x58R. Now to convert the magnum brass. I'll put it in the lathe and use it to turn off the belt. I reduced it to 0.505, just over the base diameter of the 8x58R cartridge. Now I'll flip the case around in the chuck, and I'll trim the length. I won't trim it exactly just yet, since the length will change as it sizes. I'll just trim it long enough so there's less brass for the sizing die to work. I trim the brass just ahead of the shoulder. Trimming this way leaves a good sized burr, so I'll use a deburring tool on the outside and the inside of the case mouth. Like before, I'll anneal. The magnum brass is much thicker than the 4570, so it takes a few seconds longer. Now that the brass is softer, I can start resizing. I'll use the correct shell holder for the magnum brass. This time, instead of screwing the sizing die all the way down, I'll touch off the shell holder and then unscrew it a quarter turn. Due to the thin rim on the magnum brass, I'm going to be sizing it so it head spaces off of the shoulder instead of the rim. When fully sized, I'll be testing the fit in the rifle often, lowering the die a small amount at a time until the brass is a snug fit in the chamber. Because I'll be testing often, I'll remove the expander from the die. This will prevent the neck from being overworked by continuously sizing. I'll be sure to use plenty of case wax. Like I said during annealing, the magnum brass is much thicker than the 4570, so it takes a lot more force to size. Stopping often to respread the case wax and apply more goes a long way to be able to convert these. A heavy-duty press like this RCBS Rebel is necessary, as well as a solid workbench to mount it to. My workbench top is made from 1-inch thick pine, as well as 1/2-inch plywood under the press, and you can see how much it's flexing here. Now that it's fully sized, I'll test it in the action. I'm not able to turn the bolt handle at all. Looks like it needs to be sized more. I'll mark the position of the die. Then I'll screw it in another quarter of a turn. This time I'm able to rotate the bolt, but not all the way closed. I'll advance the die another 1/8 of a turn. Based on how much I've turned it, this should be the equivalent of a light cam over. Not how far I had the die down when sizing the 4570, but close. I can feel slight resistance in the last few degrees of rotation in the bolt. It feels like a case that's been once fired and then next sized, which is just what I was targeting. Of course, every rifle and chamber is different, so I suggest dialing in the fit like I did. Now to trim the brass to its final length. The correct length for the 8x58R is 2.28 inches. This is about 100 thou long. I'll carefully put the case in the chuck jaws, pulling it out so the rim index is off at the back of the jaws. I'll touch the cutter to the case mouth. Then using a dial indicator on the carriage, I'll position the needle at the 0. I'll advance 1 full revolution. It's about 10 thou too long. The case probably moved a bit in the jaws while cutting, since I only had it clamped snugly. I can redo the setup, this time only removing 10 thou. That's spot on now. I'll deburr the case mouth, both outside and inside. Back on the press, I'll wax the inside of the case mouth, and then reinstall the expander and the sizing die. I'll only run the neck through the expander. I won't raise the ram all the way up. Here's the original 8x58R, flanked by 2 different methods of cartridge conversions. The shoulder position on the magnum brass may differ slightly from the others, but it's not visible. Unfortunately, I can't discuss load data in this video. I don't want it to be removed. Like any other cartridge, I suggest you start low and work your way up. Personally, I started low and stayed fairly low. You'll see later that it doesn't have much recoil. The feel is comparable to a commercial loading of 3040 Krag, or one of the 6.5 or 7mm cartridges. But I will give the advice to not follow the load data provided in the Cartridges of the World book. The loads they list are very hot. They're a good 5 grains hotter than their own 8mm Mauser or 30-06 loadings, and over 10 grains hotter than I'd ever load in a Danish Krag. And speaking of that, load data for 8x58R shot in a Danish Krag is very different than 8x58R shot in a Swedish rolling block. The Krag is a much stronger action, as it was designed for smokeless powder and can handle more pressure than the rolling block, which is originally intended to shoot black powder. I don't have a Swedish rolling block, at least not one chambered in 8x58R, but if I did, I'd be starting from scratch as far as load development goes. But with all of that out of the way, it's time to seat the bullet. Like I said, I stick to bullets around 200 grains to mirror the original cartridge. These are full metal jackets weighing 198 grains. I've used FMJs like these, as well as soft points, and they both feed just fine in the Krag magazine. And although a lot of milsurp rifles have issues with boat tails, these shoot nice in my rifle. For the seating die, I'll screw it down until it touches the shell holder, and then back it off a full turn. I don't crimp bottleneck cartridges, as the neck tension is enough to hold the bullet, and the crimp will interfere with seating. I'll start with the magnum brass. I have the seating stem out quite a bit, so I can dial in the seating depth. From here, I can start lowering the seating stem. The maximum overall length is 3.07 inches, or 78 millimeters. Here I have over 100 thou left to go. The overall length is limited by the magazine in the Krag. If single loading, or loading for a Swedish rolling block, the max length would be based on the bullet's ogive and the chamber depth. You may notice the bullet is being seated past the cannular. It's fine. The 8x58R case has a long neck. If I seat it to the cannular, it would be much too long for the magazine, and most likely too long to chamber. It's just about 10 thou off now. I'll lower the seating stem a quarter turn. And that's perfect. Now with the seating stem set, adding the bullet to the 4570 conversion is very straightforward. All I need is the correct shell holder for that case, and the bullet should be seated to the same overall length. You can see that with the shorter neck on the 4570 conversion, the ogive ends up in its standard position. So while the neck is shorter, it's long enough to support this bullet type, and likely most others. Here's the two completed loadings, using different cartridge conversion methods. And here's a few more to test. Time to head to the range. I'll shoot the 4570 cases first. Between the two different types of brass, I use the same load data, bullet, and seating depth, so I'm only looking at how the brass performs during both feeding and extraction. No surprise but the 4570 cases, with the rim dimensions almost exactly matching the 8x58R, are extracting well. Now onto the magnum cases. They feed into the chamber just fine. I had been a bit concerned about the undersized rim here, it not sticking out far enough to be in the path of the bolt. It also fires just fine, but when it comes to extraction, it looks like the extractor is able to pull the case out of the chamber, but then it loses grip before it brings the case to the ejector. Same thing here, it extracts, but isn't able to hold onto the case. The bolt is a bit harder to open with these cases, I think due to them head spacing off at the shoulder instead of the rim. The brass is already a tight fit to the chamber, even before firing. One thing I noticed is that despite using the same loads for each type of brass, the 4570 cases have signs of blow-by, whereas the Magnum cases don't. Blow-by, or blowback, is caused by light loads that aren't powerful enough to cause the brass to expand to fill and then seal the chamber. Some gas escapes backwards, leaving dark spots on the outside of the brass. The Magnum brass, with its longer neck, may help here. Now let's see how they shot. Looks like I need to adjust the windage, but the grouping is pretty decent for me pulling the trigger. Both cases perform well enough. They shoot just fine. But I think there's a clear winner in terms of both ease of conversion and performance on the range. The 4570 cases. Both cases require lathe work to convert. However, turning down a rim diameter is easier than turning off a belt and can be done by hand easier if you don't have a lathe. The 4570 cases, with their thinner brass walls, is easier to convert, and with them head spacing off of the rim, getting them to be a perfect fit to the chamber isn't necessary. And on the range, the 4570 cases extract and eject beautifully. The one advantage the Magnum cases have, their length, can easily be negated if you're able to find 4590 brass to convert. But in times of shortages, either 4570 or Magnum brass can be successfully converted to A558R. Thanks for watching.